allow the pathogens, the bad bacteria and stuff to fester, and that's not good for the soil. That could lead to some, like, all kinds of things, bad things. And so you want aeration. And so he was doing some testing to figure out how deeply oxygen can penetrate into a compost pile. So that, you know, if you've seen big compost piles where it's like a windrow, like a long row about 4 feet or 6 feet high of just all the stuff that they're trying to break down, and they'll have big machines that turn it. So they'll turn that pretty much every day to day and a half, or 2 days or 3 days, depending on the temperature, but it has to get oxygen into the center of the pile or else that could go bad. So he's trying to see how far the oxygen can penetrate, and it turns out 12 inches is what it can do. So in any direction, if you have air, an air source, it can penetrate a foot in. So essentially this is to get no more than 2 feet wide compost in any direction. So because it can come in from this side to this side, you know, a foot this way, everything's aerated. So he started by building it on a pallet so the farmer could take a skid loader and move it from place to place. But like that's like crazy for any home scale gardener type of thing. Like nobody's going to be lifting their pallet up and taking like a 2-ton pile of compost anywhere. And this other guy, Diego Footer, he was messing with the idea and figuring out like there's some things with the Johnson-Su method that made it kind of like a pain in the butt, and so he's trying to better that. So he came up with this style, and I built it last year myself on our house, and it worked out great. There's like I just dug up the compost a few weeks ago, and like the worms are all the way up in there. Pure black soil, super awesome stuff. Smells great, you know, smells perfect. I buried some dead animals in there, which I guess technically you're not supposed to do, but it's all you know. So essentially what we're going to do is build a inner column or cylinder that's going to be empty. So air source in the center, and then a larger cylinder so the air is coming from the outside. So you got air coming from in between, and the inner circle is going to be 2 foot diameter, and the outer circle is going to be 6 foot diameter. So that's 2 feet of compost all the way around, and that comes up to be if we're filling it completely full, you would have
5 yards.
If it was 5 feet tall, you would have 5.5 feet of compost, or 5.5 cubic yards of compost at the end. And before I built this, I had 5 pallet composters, like so it's essentially 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. That's a cubic yard. So I had 5 cubic yards, and it took up like this whole line. And then when I combined it all into this, I filled the whole thing and still had room with all that compost, all that stuff in those five composters down to the 6 foot circle, right? So it took up less space. And then I was throwing grass clippings every time I mowed or whatever, like garden waste, filling it. And I did this for a couple of months where filled it, and then it would go down by a foot, and then fill it again, go down by a foot, fill it again, and then I stopped and let it sit. The sticks are to essentially, like he built, the original design was up on a pallet so you could get airflow underneath as well. I don't think it's really necessary, but we'll do it. We'll put some sticks down at the bottom, which, you know, if you crisscross pattern, that will allow airflow in at the bottom. But if you're getting it from both sides, a foot in, a foot either way, it should be fine. And the worms will just come up over time. If it does get hot, it's not really like essential, I think, that it gets to, you know, 160 degrees or like 130 to 160 is what I think the thermophilic compost, the hot composting method calls for. But it probably will warm up.
Oh yeah.
The other thing is he had originally was studying this, or the state that he lives in was, and the college that he works for, I think New Mexico State University or whatever, was trying to figure out what to do with dairy manure, dairy cow manure. So he was working with this idea for that, and it works. But so you can put manure in there, it's probably fine, and like I said, meat and other things, whatever. But what he found was primo was leaves, like the fall leaves, loading that up in there, because that's really mimicking like the forest floor, all right? And what I also did was grab earlier a bunch of leaves off of the forest back there, just went, you know, not far, but grabbed some dry leaves and some of the leaf mold soil. So if you scrape back the leaves, anywhere when you're hiking, if if you go to a nice spot where there's a bunch of dry leaves, you scrape back the leaves, and you want to scrape off like the top 1 inch of that black dirt. That's called leaf mold soil. That's natural fertilizer, and like the amount of microbes and bacteria, nematodes, all the good stuff in that 1 inch layer is super, super awesome. And so we're gonna inoculate the whole thing with a mixture. Like, so I went to different spots, grabbed some leaves, and there's people in like the environmental type are like, you're gonna destroy the forest. Like, we're talking, you don't need a lot. I have a cup, like a handful from one spot.
It's like a sourdough starter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gonna grow.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll inoculate the whole thing with that.